The Wilson family reunion was every bit as stifling as I remembered. Crystal chandeliers glittered above in my aunt's palatial mansion, casting shimmering reflections off designer gowns and gold-plated watches. The air was saturated with a potent cocktail of expensive perfume and generational superiority, an unmistakable signature of my relatives. I lingered near the edge of the room, an observer rather than a participant. My cousins were locked in a noisy battle of one-upmanship, swapping stories of recent triumphs, promotions, deals, acquisitions. My simple black dress, chosen specifically to avoid notice, felt like both camouflage and armor. "Olivia!" My Aunt Patricia's voice sliced through the chatter like a knife through fondant. "I nearly didn't see you. Still working as a secretary, dear?" I took a measured sip of champagne, letting the bubbles mask my smirk. "Administrative assistant, actually." She raised a perfectly arched brow. "Still at that, what was it called again?" "Summit something." "Summit Solutions," I said, keeping my tone neutral. My cousin Ethan, freshly minted partner at his father's law firm, sidled over, grinning like a golden retriever. "Come on, Liv. You know I could hook you up with a real job. Something with actual career prospects." I thought of the contracts piled on my desk back at the office. My real office, not the fictional front I maintain for appearances. "I'm happy where I am, thanks." "Happy?" Aunt Patricia let out a brittle laugh that could have cracked the crystal. "Darling, you're wasting your potential. Your cousins are executives, partners, leaders in real business. And you're still pushing papers for someone else. If only they knew. That someone else they dismissed so easily was me. My story, how I built a business empire in secret, began 10 years ago in this very house. I had just graduated from business school, armed with an MBA and a disruptive idea for reviving struggling companies. I had polished my pitch for weeks, believing my family's vast web of business connections would open doors. Instead, they slammed shut. "Consulting!" Uncle Robert had sneered. "Leave that to the big firms. Join the family business. Start in the mailroom. Work your way up, just like everyone else." Of course, everyone else meant my male cousins. In the Wilson family, success had a blueprint, designed by men, executed by men, and maintained by keeping women in the background. That night, I made 2 decisions. First, I would build my own company without a shred of help or knowledge from my family. Second, one day, they would regret every condescending word. Summit Solutions was born in a cramped office above a Chinese restaurant. I could barely afford the rent, but I had something more valuable than capital. I understood businesses, how they operated, why they failed, and how to bring them back from the brink. My first client was a manufacturing firm gasping on its last breath. Turned away by every major consultant in the city, the owner gave me a chance. I spent 3 months unraveling inefficiencies, renegotiating debts, and reshaping their processes. 6 months later, they were turning a profit. Whispers began to circulate in the business world about a discreet consulting firm that performed miracles. I built my team with care, choosing those who shared my vision and my need for secrecy. Every employee signed airtight NDAs. My name appeared nowhere on public documents. I was just the CEO, an anonymous architect behind the curtain. Even as we grew into a sleek downtown headquarters, I kept my original office above the restaurant. When my family asked about work, I gave them bland stories filled with filing cabinets and spreadsheets. Their eyes glazed over, just as I intended. And now, here I was again, surrounded by people who still didn't know they'd been dismissing a woman who had quietly built an empire. Let them talk. I had nothing left to prove, and everything left to enjoy. The deception wasn't just about pride, it was tactical. The Wilson family empire thrived on acquiring distressed businesses at bargain prices, swooping in like vultures to strip them for parts and profits. My firm, Summit Solutions, had made its name doing the exact opposite, rescuing those same companies from the brink, pulling them back to stability before they could fall prey to predators like my family. For the past decade, we'd worked quietly in the shadows, undermining Wilson Ventures' hostile takeovers, one company at a time, while quietly building a consulting powerhouse of our own. Now, 10 years later, Summit Solutions had a presence in 12 cities, a Fortune 500 heavy client list, and a reputation for engineering miraculous turnarounds. And yet, Not a single smug relative sipping champagne around me had any idea I was behind it all. More champagne, dear? Aunt Patricia's saccharine voice pulled me back to the present. Although perhaps you should stick to water, I doubt your salary leaves much room for vintage tastes. I accepted the glass with a practiced smile. Thank you, Aunt Patricia. How's Uncle Robert's latest acquisition going? Williams Manufacturing, wasn't it? Her smile wavered. There have been complications. But nothing Robert can't handle, of course. What she didn't know was that those complications had a name mine. Williams Manufacturing had been one of Robert's recent takeover targets. Desperate, the company's board had reached out to Summit Solutions 3 months earlier. We'd overhauled their operations, revitalized their financials, and, crucially, fortified them against predatory buyouts. Their stock was rising fast. Uncle Robert's plans were unraveling. I heard they brought in some consulting firm, Ethan added with a dismissive shrug. Probably burning cash for nothing. Consultants, big talk, no delivery. I hid another smile. Summit's fee for saving Williams was more than Ethan would earn in 5 years at his father's firm. Oh, which firm? I asked lightly. Summit something. He waved a hand. Not important. Dad says the CEO hides behind a curtain anyway. Probably just some rich kid playing executive. My clutch buzzed. A message from my real assistant lit up the screen. Emergency. 9 a.m. meeting requested. Wilson Venture seeking merger discussion regarding Williams Manufacturing. Immediate response needed. I scanned the message again. Twice. They were giving up. After failing to seize control, Wilson Ventures now wanted a merger. Which meant one thing. They needed my firm's approval. They were walking straight into my territory. Everything all right, dear? Aunt Patricia asked, noting the shift in my expression. Perfect, actually, I said, draining my champagne. I should head home. Early meeting tomorrow. Oh, taking notes for someone important. I offered her my sweetest smile. Something like that. The next morning, I rose into the Summit Solutions executive floor in my private elevator. Gone was the understated black dress from last night. In its place, a navy Chanel suit, razor-sharp and perfectly tailored, a power color for a power play. My assistant, Maya, waited as the doors opened, tablet in hand and eyes twinkling. The Wilson Ventures team is early, she said. Your uncle seems very eager to meet Summit's CEO. I'm sure he is, I replied, smoothing my jacket as I walked. My reflection in the glass wall was cool, composed, unrecognizable to the woman they had dismissed for a decade. Main conference room? I asked. Yes, with Mr. Harrison from Williams Manufacturing. Maya grinned. Your cousin Ethan is here too, insisted on handling the legal aspects himself. Of course he did. I recalled his smug grin from last night. I could get you a real job, he'd said. Who else came? Your Aunt Patricia, moral support, apparently. And your cousin James from the finance team. Perfect. A full house. Let the show begin. I checked my watch. 8:57 a.m. Did they get coffee? I asked. Maya smirked. Your aunt complained there was no one to serve it. I couldn't help but laugh. And you told them that the administrative assistant would be in shortly. For 10 years, I'd hidden in plain sight, playing the role of background support, bringing coats, refilling coffee, taking notes, while running one of the most influential consulting firms in the country. My disguise had been flawless. They never once looked closely at the quiet woman they deemed unimportant. Give me 2 minutes, I said, straightening the deep navy lines of my Chanel suit. Then bring in the contracts. Behind the heavy conference room doors, I could already hear them, my uncle's commanding tone, Ethan's smug commentary, Aunt Patricia's clipped laugh echoing off the glass walls. I took a breath, squared my shoulders, and stepped inside. The room fell silent. Uncle Robert sat at the head of the table, naturally assuming the position of power. Ethan and James flanked him in suits tailored with family money. Aunt Patricia lounged nearby, inspecting her manicure with bored disdain. On the far side sat Mr. Harrison, the CEO of Williams Manufacturing, shifting in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. Aunt Patricia was the first to speak. We've been waiting for, she stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes narrowed. Olivia, what on earth are you wearing? And why aren't you carrying coffee? I walked to the seat directly across from Uncle Robert and sat down, deliberate, calm. I don't serve coffee anymore, Aunt Patricia. In fact, I never really did. Uncle Robert bristled. What is this? We're a Summit CEO. We were promised a meeting with the actual decision-maker. You're having one, I said, folding my hands on the table. I'm the CEO of Summit Solutions. I have been since I founded the company, 10 years ago. The silence hit like a dropped glass. Ethan looked like a malfunctioning chatbot, his mouth opening and closing without words. James dropped his pen. Even Aunt Patricia's polished exterior cracked, her expression teetering between disbelief and horror. Uncle Robert was the first to recover. His voice rose with heat. This is absurd. You're a secretary. No, I replied evenly. That was a cover. An extremely effective one. Apparently, none of you ever bothered to look past it. You were all so sure I couldn't possibly be successful that you missed the fact I already was. Just then, Maya entered with a stack of contracts. She handed them out efficiently, then took her place behind my chair. These, I continued, gesturing to the documents, outline the terms under which Summit Solutions is willing to consider a merger between Wilson Ventures and Williams Manufacturing. Consider. Ethan choked. You can't be serious. This is a joke. Some kind of stunt. I picked up my phone and mirrored Summit's latest financials onto the conference room screen. Graphs, figures, and projections lit up the wall. Summit Solutions currently manages over $122 billion in client assets, I said. We have a 94% success rate in corporate restructurings. And any changes to Williams Manufacturing's business structure require our explicit approval. I turned to face them, smile poised. Does that look like a joke to you? This is impossible, Aunt Patricia whispered. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. I met her gaze. That's exactly what you were meant to believe. Then I looked to Mr. Harrison. Would you like to explain why you chose us over Wilson Ventures? He straightened, voice steady now. Summit's reputation is unmatched. When Wilson Ventures initiated their hostile takeover, Summit stepped in and executed a full restructuring. Since implementation, our profits are up 47%. Their strategy didn't just save us, it elevated us. James paled. So the plan that ruined our acquisition was mine. I finished, along with a few brilliant minds who believed in a different kind of leadership. The room was still. The power had shifted, and they all knew it. At long last I began counting on my fingers, each name a quiet dagger. Peterson Electronics, the company you tried to acquire last year. Maritime Shipping, which slipped through your fingers last quarter. The Davidson Group, miraculously revived right before your buyout attempt. I leaned in slightly, just enough to make Uncle Robert flinch. For the last 10 years, I've been systematically dismantling every predatory move Wilson Ventures has made. Quietly, precisely, and you never saw it coming. Uncle Robert's face was turning a dangerous shade of crimson. You sabotaged family business? No, I said, my voice smooth as steel. I built my business. One that helps companies survive instead of being carved up for scrap. That it disrupted your plans. I shrugged. Just a little poetic justice. This is outrageous, Ethan barked, standing abruptly. I'm calling our lawyers. Sit down, Ethan. My voice stopped him cold. You might want to read the contracts in front of you, the ones your firm spent months negotiating for this meeting. The silence, stretched thin as recognition, slowly dawned across his face. Yes, I continued. That firm's biggest client this year? That was me. I paid you to help me orchestrate your own undoing. Maya stepped forward, placing a sleek folder on the table. This is a current summary of Summit's market position and liquidity. You'll notice, I said, we're now in a position to acquire a controlling interest in Wilson Ventures if we choose. Chaos erupted. Aunt Patricia was on the verge of hyperventilating. James fumbled with his phone, frantically refreshing financial reports. Ethan dropped back into his chair, pale and stunned. This is blackmail, Uncle Robert growled. No, I said quietly, this is business. The kind you always said I'd never understand, never be capable of handling. I stood, smoothing the front of my suit jacket, voice clear and calm. You have until 5 p.m. to review the merger terms. They're quite generous, considering our leverage. Decline, and Summit Solutions will begin acquiring Wilson Ventures stock on the open market tomorrow. I made my way toward the door, then paused, turning back with a smile. Oh, and Aunt Patricia, about that champagne you offered me last night? I bought the vineyard last year. That coffee you demanded this morning? I own the entire chain now. I gave her a sweet, final smile. Turns out my salary does allow for expensive tastes. Then I walked out, the door closing softly behind me, sealing in their stunned silence. Back in my private office, I finally allowed myself to breathe. 10 years of hiding behind polite smiles and paper cups. 10 years of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. And now, the truth was out. I no longer had to pretend to be less than I was. Maya appeared with a steaming cup of my favorite blend from the coffee company I now owned. Well, she asked, worth the wait? I took a sip, let the flavor settle, and nodded. Every second, my phone buzzed again, text from family already pouring in. Aunt Patricia, let's have lunch, darling. I always believed in you. Ethan, come on, Liv. We were just messing around. Family's family, right? James, you can't really do this to us, we're blood. I silenced the phone without looking. They'd have time to adjust to their new reality. I had an empire to run, and for the first time in a decade, I'd do it on my terms. No cover stories, no disguises, just power earned. And visible that I ignored the flood of messages from my relatives, tuning out their desperate spin attempts and performative outrage. My focus was on the only voices that mattered now, Wilson Ventures board members. They weren't fools. They saw the writing on the wall. By noon, they had called an emergency board meeting. By 3 p.m., the vote was in. Summit's merger terms were accepted. Of course, Uncle Robert didn't go quietly. You've betrayed this family, he shouted as he burst into my office unannounced, fury echoing in every step. Maya stood, ready to intervene. I raised a hand. Let him have this moment. Actually, I said, still typing, I'd say I learned from this family. Isn't this what you taught us? Seize power. Eliminate the competition. Never show weakness. We gave you everything, he snapped. I finally looked up, letting the words hang in the air. Then I laughed, a short, dry sound. You gave me nothing. Less than nothing. You taught me I was only valuable as a support act. Quiet, obedient, forgettable. So I built something better. I stood and faced him fully. By deceiving you? No. By letting you deceive yourselves. You saw what you wanted to see. An unambitious woman who knew her place. That was your mistake, not mine. The fire drained from him. He dropped into one of the chairs, suddenly looking smaller. Older. Why now? He asked, voice quieter. You could have stayed hidden. Because I'm done hiding. I closed my laptop. Williams Manufacturing wasn't your only target. You've set your sights on Thompson Electronics, Maritime Solutions, companies full of good people trying to stay afloat. I'm done watching you tear them down. It's business, he muttered weakly. No, I said firmly. It's greed, and it ends here. I handed him a folder. These are the final merger terms. Summit Solutions is acquiring a controlling interest in Wilson Ventures. We'll restructure, focus on building, not breaking. He opened the folder, hands trembling. You can stay on as a consultant if you accept the new vision. If not, your golden parachute is detailed on page 3. He stared at the pages, silent. You thought of everything, he finally said. I smiled without softness. I learned from the best. Just not in the way you hoped. After he left, Maya brought in a stack of newspapers. The headlines were already everywhere. Secret CEO revealed, the woman who quietly built a billion-dollar empire. The Wilson family's blind spot becomes their biggest loss. Meet the executive who outsmarted her entire legacy. Then my phone buzzed with a message that mattered. Mom, I always knew you'd show them. She had divorced Uncle Robert's brother years ago, escaping the toxic web of expectations. She knew exactly what this moment meant. The weeks that followed were a blur of transformation. The board of Wilson Ventures fully embraced Summit's direction. Their stock jumped 40% after the announcement. Companies that once feared the Wilson name were now reaching out for partnerships. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Aunt Patricia, ever the opportunist, attempted to spin it as a heartwarming family triumph. "We always knew Olivia had potential," she told one reporter. "It's the Wilson spirit of entrepreneurship." I responded by releasing footage from last year's family reunion, where she'd spent 20 minutes explaining in detail why I'd never amount to anything. The video went viral. She stopped giving interviews after that. Ethan tried his own damage control, claiming he'd been in on it the whole time. Unfortunately, too many people had seen his jaw hit the floor in the conference room. His law firm's clients started asking questions. A month later, he was quietly placed on leave. James was the quickest to pivot. 2 weeks after the reveal, he invited me to lunch and pitched a joint venture. "We could dominate the market together," he said. "We don't dominate," I told him. "We elevate." But the real change, it came in the quiet moments, like when a young intern stopped me in the hallway, eyes full of tears. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing us that success doesn't have to mean becoming like them." That's when I knew this was bigger than a takeover. This was a reckoning and a revolution. After the reveal, something unexpected happened. Messages poured in, not from my family, but from women in boardrooms across the country. Female executives shared stories of being dismissed, underestimated, overlooked. They thanked me for showing what was possible. Business schools reached out, inviting me to speak about building ethical success in a cutthroat world. A few months later, I stood on stage accepting the Business Innovation Award. Looking out over the crowd, I spotted my mother in the front row, glowing with pride. Just behind her sat a row of my former administrative assistants, brilliant women who had once helped me maintain the illusion, all of whom now held leadership roles within Summit. "Success isn't about who holds the most power," I told the audience. "It's about how you use the power you have." For 10 years, I let people underestimate me. I could have revealed myself sooner, but I waited until Summit was strong enough not just to succeed, but to change the game. The applause was loud and lasting, but the real victory came later that evening. I was finishing up some work in my office when Maya stepped in with a gleam in her eye. "You'll want to see this," she said, handing me a printed press release. Uncle Robert had just announced his retirement. The last paragraph of his resignation letter caught me off guard. My niece taught me that true success in business isn't measured in acquisitions or assets, but in the impact we make. I regret that it took losing control of my company to understand this. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle in. 10 years. 10 years of playing small, of swallowing pride, of watching, waiting, and working behind the scenes. It had all led to this. Summit Solutions wasn't just a powerhouse now, it was a symbol of change. A proof point that ethical leadership and strategic brilliance weren't mutually exclusive. The next family reunion? I planned to host it myself, in Summit's main conference room. The same one where I had once served coffee, taking coats and taking notes, waiting for the perfect moment to rewrite the script. There was a knock at the door. "Your 4 p.m. is here," Maya said. "The CEO of Thomson Electronics. The company your uncle once tried to acquire." I smiled. "Show them in." "And Maya, bring coffee. The good stuff. From our chain." As I stood to greet them, I caught my reflection in the window. No more hiding. No more playing small. I had built something powerful, not in spite of my family's dismissal, but because of it. They had taught me that power doesn't always look like what people expect. Sometimes, it looks like a quiet woman in a black dress, serving coffee, smiling politely, while building an empire beneath their noses. The tabloids called it revenge. The business press called it genius. But to me, it was simply justice, served one corporate takeover at a time, with a side of perfectly brewed coffee. Somewhere, above an old Chinese restaurant, my original desk still sits. I keep it as a reminder. Success doesn't always wear designer labels. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it moves silently, patiently, building something extraordinary, while the world looks the other way. That's the real secret to success. Not the power you show, but the power you build when no one's watching.